It was a quiet afternoon in the small town of Lemba. The sun had hidden behind soft gray clouds, and the air felt heavy with the promise of rain. Nia, a cheerful girl of 10, ran barefoot across the dusty ground, her laughter echoing as she played with her friends. The girls and boys had made up games with sticks and stones, chasing each other around in circles, their faces bright with excitement. Their shouts mixed with the occasional squawk of a bird flying across the sky. Nia's mother, Mrs. Afolabi, was nearby in her garden. She was a tall woman with gentle eyes and a calm smile. Her hands moved skillfully among the green plants, touching the leaves, adjusting the stems, and brushing away small stones from the soil. She hummed softly as she worked, a tune she had learned as a little girl, one that reminded her of her own mother. She loved her garden. It was not only a place where she grew vegetables and flowers but also a place where she felt peace. The colors of the leaves, the smell of the damp earth, and the sound of water dripping from the watering can all made her feel happy and calm. Nia's friends ran past the garden, giggling and calling to each other. "Come on, Nia. Catch me," shouted one of the boys, his shirt sticking to him from the humid air. Nia ran as fast as she could, her dark braids bouncing with every step. Mrs. Afolabi watched from the garden, smiling softly. She loved seeing her daughter laugh and play. There was a small satisfaction in watching life go on around her, in seeing children enjoy the little things. The sky slowly turned darker. The clouds had gathered together, thick and heavy. The light breeze had become cooler, and the air smelled different, almost like the scent of wet soil before a storm. Nia stopped running for a moment and looked up at the clouds. "Mom, do you think it will rain?" she asked. Her voice was small but curious. Mrs. Afolabi looked up as well. She could see the clouds rolling in, gray and thick, covering the sun almost completely. She smiled at her daughter. "Maybe, Nia," she said softly. "The clouds are telling us rain is coming, but we still have a little time." She wiped her hands on her apron and touched a few leaves to make sure the plants were still strong. The first raindrops fell gently on the garden. They were tiny, soft drops that barely made the soil wet. Mrs. Afolabi lifted her face to the sky and let the drops touch her cheeks. There was something calming about the feeling, a connection to the world that made her feel alive. She hummed her tune a little louder, letting the music mix with the sound of the raindrops. Nia's friends ran for cover under a nearby tree, laughing and squealing as the drops started falling a little faster. Nia ran to the porch for a moment but stopped when she saw her mother still in the garden, calm and unbothered. "Mom, come inside. It's raining," she shouted, her voice full of concern and excitement at the same time. Mrs. Afolabi laughed softly. "Don't worry, Nia. The rain is not strong yet. It's nice to feel it," she said, shaking a small leaf from her hands. Her clothes were already beginning to get damp from the gentle rain, but she didn't mind at all. She felt a strange joy standing there, surrounded by the scent of wet earth and the soft hum of the sky. Nia watched her mother carefully. She had never seen her act like this before, staying so calm in the rain while everyone else ran for cover. She felt curious and a little worried. Her mother was usually very careful about everything. She liked to plan to keep things neat and tidy. Seeing her in the rain, with water dripping from her hair and her apron clinging to her, made Nia wonder if something unusual was happening. The rain began to fall harder. Small streams of water ran down the garden path, forming tiny puddles that reflected the gray sky. Mrs. Afolabi bent down and touched the water with her hands, letting it run through her fingers. She laughed quietly at the coolness and the soft splash it made. She remembered her own childhood when she and her siblings used to run in the rain and jump in puddles, not caring about getting wet. Life had taught her many lessons since then, and she had grown careful and disciplined, but for these few moments she allowed herself to remember the simple joy of those days. Nia stepped closer, hesitating. She wanted to understand what her mother was feeling. "Mom, why do you stay here? Everyone else ran away," she asked. Her voice was full of innocence, full of the need to understand the world from her mother's eyes. Mrs. Afolabi smiled at Nia and took her hand gently. "Sometimes, Nia, it's good to pause and feel the world even when it seems inconvenient. Rain is a gift. It waters the plants, it cools the air, and it reminds us of life. It's just water, nothing to fear." She let the words sink in, hoping her daughter would learn to see the little joys in life. Nia looked at the drops falling from the sky and slowly began to understand. The drizzle slowly changed into a steady, heavier rain. Tiny drops grew larger and fell faster, drumming on the roof of the houses and the leaves of the trees. The children who had been playing in the garden hurried toward the porch. Their laughter mixed with nervous shrieks as they ran, their bare feet slipping slightly on the wet ground. Some of them tried to hold their shirts over their heads, but the wind and rain were stronger than their small arms could manage. Nia stood at the edge of the porch, peering out at her mother. Her heart beat fast. Mrs. Afolabi, calm and composed as ever, remained in the middle of the garden. Her long, dark hair was now damp and clinging to her neck and shoulders. Her clothes were soaked, sticking to her skin, but she did not move. She tilted her face toward the sky and raised her arms slightly, as if she wanted to embrace the storm. "Mom, come inside. You will get sick," Nia shouted, worry rising in her chest. She ran toward her mother, her sandals splashing in puddles. But Mrs. Afolabi only laughed softly. Her laugh was quiet, yet it carried a lightness that seemed to fill the garden. She looked down at Nia, her eyes calm and full of understanding. "It's okay, Nia. Don't be afraid. The rain is gentle. It will not hurt us." The neighbors began to notice. From their windows they leaned out cautiously, some holding towels or umbrellas. A few shook their heads in disbelief. "Why is she still out there?" whispered one woman, her voice a mixture of shock and curiosity. An older man holding a small radio nodded slowly. "Some people find happiness in strange ways," he said, smiling faintly, almost to himself. The rain fell harder now, drumming on the roofs, running down the sides of the houses, and forming small rivers along the streets. The garden became a patchwork of puddles. Mrs. Afolabi stepped carefully through them, letting her feet feel the cool water. She bent down to touch a flower, its petals heavy with water. She whispered to it softly, "Grow strong, little one. Drink deep, for the world is full of life." Nia watched, fascinated. She had never seen her mother so connected to nature, so alive in a simple moment. The children on the porch began to watch as well. Some of them were still a little scared of the rain, but curiosity kept their eyes glued to Mrs. Afolabi. They noticed how she moved, gracefully and deliberately, without fear or hurry. She was not just standing there, she was part of the rain, part of the garden, part of something bigger than herself. Nia felt a strange pride swelling in her chest. This was her mother, brave and free in a way she had never realized before. Nia stepped off the porch and ran toward her mother again. She reached out her hand and Mrs. Afolabi took it gently. "Come, Nia," she said. "Feel it with me. Let the rain touch you. Don't worry about getting wet." Nia hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped into the garden. The rain fell harder, splashing against her arms and legs. A shiver ran through her body, but it was not unpleasant. It was refreshing, like drinking a cold sip of water after a long hot day. The neighbors watched in silence. Some whispered among themselves, trying to understand why a woman would stay in the rain, completely soaked, without fear. Others simply smiled, unable to take their eyes off the unusual scene. Mrs. Afolabi moved gently among the plants, checking each one, touching leaves, and letting water run through her fingers. It was as if the rain had made everything in the garden come alive, and she was a part of its rhythm. Nia began to feel the joy too. She laughed quietly as a small puddle splashed her feet. She looked up at her mother, who was still smiling and humming her tune. The sound of her mother's voice, mixed with the rain, created a melody that felt magical. Nia lifted her arms, letting the raindrops fall on her face. She felt free, unafraid, and completely alive. For the first time, she understood why her mother had stayed outside, why she had not sought shelter like everyone else. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of wet earth and flowers. Tiny leaves fell from the trees, spinning in the air before landing in puddles. Mrs. Afolabi twirled slowly, her wet clothes swirling around her legs. Nia watched and laughed, spinning too. For a moment, the garden became a world of its own, separate from the busy town, separate from rules or fear. It was just them, the rain and the garden. A few children from the neighbors' houses cautiously came out from under their shelters. They hesitated at first, unsure of what to do, but the sight of Mrs. Afolabi dancing gently in the rain encouraged them. Slowly they stepped into the wet grass, splashing through puddles. Laughter began to echo across the street. Nia's friends joined in, and soon the garden was filled with the happy noise of children enjoying the rain. Even the animals seemed to sense something special. Birds perched on nearby branches, shaking their wet feathers. A small brown dog from a neighbor's yard ran around in circles, barking happily, while a cat sat quietly, watching the water drip from the leaves. The entire garden seemed alive, vibrant, and full of energy. The rain had not brought fear, it had brought life. Mrs. Afolabi noticed Nia's friends and smiled. "See, Nia? The rain can bring joy, not just worry. Don't be afraid of simple things," she said. Her voice was calm but full of warmth. Nia nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding. She realized that this was a lesson, one she would carry with her forever. Life did not always need to be controlled or planned. Sometimes, happiness could be found in letting go, in embracing what was around you, even when it seemed inconvenient or strange. The drizzle continued to grow stronger, turning into a steady downpour. Water ran down the paths, creating small streams that reflected the gray sky above. Nia's hair clung to her face and her clothes were soaked through, but she didn't care. She ran around with her mother, splashing water and laughing. Each laugh seemed to push the clouds a little higher, filling the garden with warmth and energy despite the cold rain. Neighbors could not believe what they were seeing. Some shook their heads, still in shock, while others quietly admired the scene. A few whispered, "She's brave," or, "I wish I could do that too." They saw the joy and the freedom in Mrs. Afolabi's actions, the way she had turned a simple garden and a rainy day into something magical. As the rain fell, Mrs. Afolabi bent down to touch the soil. Water pooled around her fingers and she smiled. "See, Nia? Even small things need care and attention. The rain gives life. It nourishes the plants, the earth, and even us." Nia nodded, feeling a new respect for her mother. She realized that staying in the rain was not just play, it was an expression of love, care, and connection to life itself. Nia's friends began to understand too. They splashed in the puddles, tried to catch raindrops on their hands, and watched the flowers and leaves dance in the storm. Slowly, fear turned into fascination and hesitation turned into joy. The garden became a place of learning, laughter, and freedom. It was no longer just a patch of land in front of a house. It was a small world full of possibilities. Mrs. Afolabi laughed softly, watching the children. Her heart was full. The rain had transformed the ordinary afternoon into a memory she knew Nia would never forget. It was simple, yet extraordinary. Life often passed quickly, but in moments like this, everything seemed to slow down. Every drop of rain, every smile, every splash of water felt important. The rain continued for a long while, steady and persistent. Nia ran and laughed, splashing through puddles. Her mother moved with grace, checking plants, touching leaves, and spinning gently in the rain. The neighbors, initially shocked, now watched quietly, some smiling, some shaking their heads in admiration. The storm had brought more than wet clothes. It had brought joy, connection, and a lesson in simple happiness. Eventually, the rain softened, turning into a gentle drizzle again. The garden glistened with water, every leaf, flower, and blade of grass shining in the gray light. Nia stood next to her mother, holding her hand. "Mom," she said softly, "I like the rain. I understand now." Mrs. Afolabi smiled, looking down at her daughter. "I'm glad, Nia. Remember, happiness is often in the little things. All you need is to notice them and let them touch you." Nia nodded, feeling a warmth in her heart despite the cool rain on her skin. The garden was quiet now, except for the soft dripping of water from leaves. Nia looked around, noticing the small puddles, the wet flowers, and the tiny streams running along the ground. It all seemed magical, as if the rain had created a new world for them to explore. She realized that moments like this, small and simple, were some of the most important in life. Mrs. Afolabi hugged Nia, both of them soaked but happy. "Come inside now," she said gently. "The rain has given us joy. Let's carry it with us as we go back to our daily lives." Nia nodded, feeling grateful for the lesson, for the rain, and for her mother. Even the neighbors, now fully awake to the unusual scene, could not stop talking about it. They had seen fear turn into joy, hesitation turn into adventure. They had watched a mother and daughter create magic in a rainy garden, and it reminded them that life could be beautiful in simple, unexpected ways. The rain finally began to fade, leaving behind a fresh, clean smell that filled the air. Nia and her mother walked slowly toward the house, water dripping from their clothes and hair, but their hearts light and full. The garden glistened behind them, alive and renewed. It was a day neither Nia nor Mrs. Afolabi would ever forget. A day when the unexpected rain had brought laughter, wonder, and a quiet lesson in the joy of simple things. A day when everyone who watched had seen that happiness could sometimes come from the most ordinary moments, if only one chose to embrace them. The rain had grown steady, falling in heavier sheets now, and the garden of Mrs. Afolabi shimmered with water. The air smelled of wet earth and flowers, and the cool drops slid down the branches, dripping rhythmically onto the soil. Nia had been running and laughing with her friends, the joy from the rain still bright in her chest. Suddenly everything changed. Mrs. Afolabi, who had been calmly walking and checking the plants, stopped in the middle of the garden. She lifted her face to the gray sky, her eyes closing as the raindrops fell freely onto her cheeks. Then, almost without warning, she began to twirl. At first it was a slow turn, gentle and controlled, but then it grew faster. Her bare feet splashed in the puddles with a rhythmic sound, and the droplets of water scattered around her, sparkling in the dim light of the storm. Nia froze in place. She had never seen her mother move like this. Mrs. Afolabi's dark hair clung to her wet skin and swirled around her face as she spun, her soaked clothes sticking to her body. Her arms lifted and fell gracefully with each turn, as if she were dancing with the rain itself. Nia's mouth opened in surprise, and for a moment she could not speak. The other children on the porch held their breaths, unsure if they should laugh, cry, or run. The neighbors, who had been quietly watching through their windows, were equally shocked. Some gasped softly. Some leaned forward to get a better look. A few whispered to one another, their voices filled with disbelief. "Is she dancing in the rain?" one woman asked, her eyes wide. "I have never seen anyone do that before." A man nodded slowly, almost as if trying to understand what he was seeing. "She is not afraid of the rain. She is free," he said softly. Mrs. Afolabi's laughter rang out through the garden. It was light and joyful, and it seemed to mix with the sound of the falling rain. The rhythm of her movements matched the rhythm of the storm, creating a harmony that made the air feel alive. Nia could not help but smile, a mixture of shock and admiration filling her heart. She watched her mother move, her small hands clapping to the rhythm of her steps, her feet splashing water in a carefree way that made her seem like a child again. The puddles on the ground became part of the dance. Mrs. Afolabi stomped her feet in them, sending water spraying in all directions. Some drops landed on Nia's cheeks and clothes, and she laughed, feeling the cool splash. She wanted to join her mother, to be part of this magical moment, but for a few seconds she could not move. She was frozen, amazed at the sight of her mother letting go of all caution, of all concern for appearance or comfort. Then slowly Nia stepped into the garden. She felt the wet grass squish beneath her feet and the cold water rising around her ankles. Her mother's eyes opened, and she looked at Nia with a wide smile. "Come, Nia. Dance with me," she called. Nia hesitated only for a moment, then broke into a run. She joined her mother, and together they twirled, stomped, and laughed in the rain. Their clothes were soaked, their hair wet, but they did not care. Every movement felt alive, every drop of water a small spark of joy. The neighbors continued to watch, some still in shock, some smiling quietly. The children who had stayed on the porch slowly crept into the garden, inspired by Mrs. Afolabi's fearlessness. One by one they stepped into the puddles, feeling the water splash around their feet and laughing at the sensation. The garden became a place of wonder, of freedom, of laughter. Even the wind seemed to move more gently, carrying the sound of joy through the streets of Lemba. Mrs. Afolabi twirled faster, sending water flying in all directions. Her clothes clung to her body, revealing the graceful lines of her arms and shoulders. Her hair, dark and shiny from the rain, whipped around her face as she spun. Nia tried to mimic her movements, but she stumbled and fell into a puddle. Instead of feeling embarrassed, she burst into laughter. Her mother helped her up, still spinning, still moving with joy, and together they danced in the storm. The flowers in the garden seemed to respond to the movement. Their wet petals shook gently as Mrs. Afolabi passed by, water dripping from every leaf. She bent down to touch a particularly bright flower, sending a small splash of water into the air, then lifted her arms and spun again. The motion was graceful and carefree, unlike anything the neighbors had ever seen. It was a sight of beauty, boldness, and freedom all in one. Some of the children began to mimic her movements, twirling and stomping in the puddles, laughing and shouting. The rain became a partner in their dance, each drop a beat in the music of the moment. Nia's friends laughed with her, joining the rhythm her mother had created. The garden, once quiet and calm, was now full of movement, energy, and life. Even the animals in the area seemed to notice. Birds flew low over the wet garden, their wings glistening with water. A small dog ran around, splashing into puddles and barking happily. A cat, careful and cautious, sat on the porch, watching the joyful scene unfold. Everything in the garden seemed alive, responding to the energy and courage of Mrs. Afolabi. Nia could feel her heart pounding with excitement. She had never seen her mother like this, so bold, so carefree. She realized that this was more than just a dance. It was a release of something deep inside her mother, a freedom, a joy, a connection to life that had been waiting for this moment. The sight of it made Nia feel closer to her mother than ever. She wanted to hold on to this memory forever. Mrs. Afolabi laughed and twirled faster. She lifted her arms to the sky, letting the rain fall freely onto her face. Her laughter was pure, unrestrained, and full of happiness. Nia ran beside her, trying to keep up, her feet splashing in the puddles. She could feel the cold water running over her hands and legs, but it did not matter. For the first time she understood the magic of letting go, of being fully alive in the moment. The neighbors could not look away. Some leaned against their windows, their mouths open in amazement. Others whispered quietly to each other, trying to explain what they were seeing. "She is not just dancing, she is alive in a way I have never seen," one whispered. "I have never thought someone could be so free," said another. The scene was unusual, shocking, and beautiful all at once. Mrs. Afolabi moved through the garden with a rhythm that seemed to come from her heart rather than her feet. She bent to touch the flowers, stomped in puddles, and spun in circles. Each movement sent water flying, each laugh echoed through the garden, and each glance at Nia carried a silent message. Life is to be enjoyed, not feared. Nia felt tears mix with the rain on her face. She had never been more proud of her mother. She had always admired her calm nature, her patience, and her wisdom, but seeing her move like this was something else entirely. It showed courage, joy, and a willingness to embrace life fully. It was a lesson in living, one that Nia would never forget. The children joined more fully in the dance. They held hands, spun around, and ran through the puddles. The rain no longer felt cold or uncomfortable, it felt like a friend, a companion that had joined them in this strange, beautiful moment. Laughter, splashes, and joyful cries filled the air, creating a symphony of happiness in the middle of the storm. Mrs. Afolabi's movements became even more dramatic. She jumped into a large puddle, water flying high into the air. She spun quickly, arms outstretched, and laughed, her voice carrying over the rain. Nia tried to copy her, falling again into the water, but she could not stop laughing. Her mother's joy was contagious, spreading to everyone who saw it, even the hesitant neighbors. The garden was transformed. It was no longer just a patch of soil with flowers, it was a stage, a playground, a place where fear had been replaced by freedom. The rain was no longer an inconvenience, it was a gift. Each drop of water was a note in the music of life, and Mrs. Afolabi was its conductor, teaching everyone around her to embrace the moment. Hours could have passed, or maybe only minutes, it was impossible to tell. Time seemed to slow down in the garden. Nia felt every heartbeat, every drop of rain, every splash of water. She realized that this was a moment she would carry with her forever. The memory of her mother dancing so boldly in the rain, so carefree and alive, would never fade. Finally, the rain began to soften, turning into a gentle drizzle. Mrs. Afolabi slowed her movements, bending down to touch a flower one last time. Nia ran to her side, hugging her mother tightly. "Mom, that was amazing," she whispered, still dripping wet but full of happiness. Mrs. Afolabi smiled, holding her daughter close. "I wanted you to see, Nia," she said softly. "Life is beautiful, and sometimes we must let go to feel it fully." The neighbors watched quietly as the mother and daughter stood in the wet garden, catching their breath. Some smiled, some nodded in understanding, and some whispered about the courage and joy they had witnessed. It was a moment of beauty that none of them would forget, a simple, shocking, and unforgettable display of living fully in the moment. Nia and her mother finally walked slowly toward the house, leaving the puddles behind. The garden glistened, alive with rainwater, reflecting the gray light of the sky. The laughter had faded, but the memory of the dance, the boldness, and the joy remained strong in Nia's heart. She knew, as did the neighbors who watched quietly, that something extraordinary had happened that day. Mrs. Afolabi had shown them all that freedom, joy, and courage could appear in the simplest acts. A dance in the rain could change the way people felt, the way they saw life, and the way they remembered the ordinary moments. The storm continued gently, but the garden had already been transformed. And Nia, holding her mother's hand, felt a spark of something she would carry forever. The understanding that happiness sometimes comes when you least expect it, in the most ordinary places and in the boldest of actions. The rain had finally stopped. The heavy clouds that had hung low over the town of Lemba began to break apart, letting small patches of pale sunlight fall on the wet streets and glistening gardens. The air smelled fresh, cool, and alive, carrying the soft scent of wet earth and flowers. Mrs. Afolabi stood at the edge of the garden, her clothes soaked through, her hair wet and clinging to her neck and face, but her smile was bright and calm. She looked around at the garden, at the puddles, the flowers, the droplets sparkling in the soft sunlight, and took a deep breath, savoring the peaceful moment that followed the storm. Nia ran to her mother immediately, slipping slightly on the wet grass, but she did not care. She flung her arms around her mother in a tight hug, feeling the warmth and comfort of her even through the wet clothes. "Mom," she whispered, "that was amazing. I have never seen you like that before. Mrs. Afolabi hugged her back just as tightly, pressing her cheek against Nia's hair and laughing softly. I wanted you to see, Nia. Sometimes we keep our feelings hidden, but it is good to let them show. Even if it surprises people. Nia pulled back slightly, looking into her mother's eyes. There was a light in them, a mix of joy, love, and calm that seemed to glow after the storm. Nia realized something important in that moment. Her mother's bold, shocking actions in the rain were not just about fun or freedom. They were about being true to her feelings, about expressing emotions that had been held in her heart for a long time. She had danced, laughed, and twirled not just for herself, but as a way to remember, celebrate, and honor the people she loved and the life she had lived. The neighbors were beginning to notice the end of the rain as well. Some came out slowly from their windows, drying their hands on towels or holding umbrellas, their faces a mix of curiosity and admiration. They whispered among themselves, talking quietly about what they had just seen. I never thought I would see something like that, said one woman, her eyes wide with amazement. She looked so free, so full of life. A man nodded, looking down at the glistening garden. It is rare to see someone express their emotions so openly, he said softly. It is beautiful. Nia's friends, still dripping from the rain and muddy from puddles, gathered around her. They looked at Mrs. Afolabi with awe. For them, the day had been full of excitement, surprise, and joy, but now, standing in the calm that followed the storm, they understood a deeper meaning. It was not just about playing in the rain, it was about love, memory, and courage. Nia felt proud of her mother and grateful for the lesson she had learned in such an unexpected way. Mrs. Afolabi began to walk slowly toward the house, her wet feet leaving small marks on the stone path. Nia skipped alongside her, still holding her mother's hand. Mom, she said softly, I think I understand now. You weren't just dancing for fun. You were remembering and celebrating someone you loved. Mrs. Afolabi smiled warmly, looking down at Nia. Yes, Nia. Life is full of moments like that. Sometimes we need to show our feelings even if it surprises others. Emotions are powerful, and sharing them can make us closer to the people around us. The two of them reached the porch and stepped inside the house. Mrs. Afolabi hung her wet clothes to dry and shook the remaining droplets of water from her hair. Nia followed her to the living room, her small feet leaving tiny wet prints on the wooden floor. They sat together, sipping warm tea that Mrs. Afolabi had prepared quickly before the rain, the steam rising and filling the room with a comforting scent. Nia rested her head against her mother's shoulder, feeling a deep sense of closeness and love. As they sat together, Nia reflected on everything that had happened that day. The storm, the bold dance, the drum, and the memories of her grandmother, it all made sense now. Her mother's actions had been surprising, even shocking at first, but they had been full of meaning. Nia realized that sometimes, people reveal their true emotions in ways that are unexpected, and those moments are often the most powerful and memorable. The neighbors continued to watch quietly from outside. Some had stepped onto their porches, others remained behind curtains, but all were touched by what they had witnessed. They had seen a woman reveal her emotions openly, a mother celebrating life, memory, and love in a way that was simple, yet extraordinary. Even the smallest gestures, the twirling in the puddles, the gentle tapping of the drum, the laughter that carried across the garden, had left a mark on everyone who had watched. Nia looked around at the garden now, which glistened with water and reflected the sunlight breaking through the clouds. The puddles mirrored the sky, and the flowers drooped slightly, heavy with rain but still beautiful. She remembered how her mother had danced and twirled, how she had held the drum and remembered her grandmother. It all felt magical, like a story come to life. Nia knew she would remember this day forever, and she felt a warm sense of gratitude for being part of it. Mrs. Afolabi placed the small, broken drum carefully on a shelf by the window, letting it dry but keeping it close. She looked at Nia, who was still seated near her, and said softly, Memory is a gift, Nia. Sometimes showing it, celebrating it, and sharing it makes it even stronger. Nia nodded, feeling the truth of her mother's words in her heart. She realized that the day had been more than just a storm, more than just a garden, more than just a dance. It had been a lesson in love, courage, and connection. The two of them stood by the window, watching as the last drops of rain fell from the leaves and the streets glistened with water. Birds began to return, hopping on fences and perching on wet branches, shaking their feathers and chirping softly. The garden seemed alive again, refreshed and renewed by the storm. Nia felt a sense of peace she had never felt before, a quiet happiness that came from understanding her mother and feeling connected to the memories that had shaped their lives. Her friends slowly gathered their things and returned to their homes, but they waved to Nia and her mother, smiling in quiet respect. Even the neighbors who had watched from their windows seemed changed. They whispered among themselves about courage, love, and the unexpected ways people reveal their hearts. It was a small community lesson shared without words, in the quiet aftermath of the storm. Nia hugged her mother tightly again, feeling the wet clothes and the warmth of her arms pressed against her. "Mom," she said, "I will always remember this day. I will remember you dancing, the drum, and how brave you were to show your feelings." Mrs. Afolabi kissed the top of her daughter's head, still smiling, and said, "That is all I could hope for, Nia. Remember, showing your heart is never wrong, even if it surprises others. It makes you strong and keeps the memory of those we love alive." The house was quiet now, except for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint drip of water from the window. Nia sat close to her mother, thinking about everything she had seen and felt. She realized that life was full of small, unexpected lessons. Sometimes, people reveal their true emotions in moments that seem ordinary at first, but those moments can be the most important of all. She felt grateful for the gift of witnessing her mother's courage and love. Mrs. Afolabi looked around the room, still smiling softly. She felt a quiet pride not just for herself but for Nia. She had shown her daughter that it was okay to be brave, to celebrate memories, and to let emotions flow freely. The day had been full of surprises, of laughter and of tears, but now it ended in peace, warmth, and connection. The sun began to peek out fully, casting golden light over the wet streets and the glistening garden. The puddles reflected the sky, the leaves sparkled, and the flowers seemed to lift their heads proudly after the storm. Nia and her mother stood at the window taking it all in. The world seemed fresh, renewed, and full of possibility. "Mom," Nia said softly, "I think I understand something important. Life isn't just about following rules or being careful all the time. Sometimes we need to feel, to show love, to celebrate memories, and to be brave in small ways." Mrs. Afolabi nodded, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Exactly, Nia. Those moments make life rich. They make us feel alive, and they remind us that love is what connects us to everything we hold dear." Nia smiled, leaning against her mother, feeling closer than ever. She thought of the drum, the dance, the rain, and the lesson her mother had taught her. She knew that this day would stay in her heart forever, not just as a memory of the storm, but as a memory of love, courage, and the quiet magic that comes from revealing one's heart. The neighbors began to retreat back into their routines, whispering quietly about what they had seen. Some spoke of courage, some of love, and some of the beauty of ordinary moments turned extraordinary. They had witnessed something special, a reminder that emotions, when shared openly, could touch hearts in ways that words alone could not. Nia and her mother spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning up, drying off, and talking softly. They laughed at small moments, reflected on the day, and felt a deep sense of connection. The garden, though wet and glistening, remained alive and full of life. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained, etched into their hearts. As evening approached, the light in the sky grew warm and soft, casting long shadows and a golden glow across the garden. Nia and her mother sat together on the porch, sipping tea and watching the world around them. The memory of the rain, the dance, and the drum filled the space between them, connecting them in a way that words could not fully describe. Nia realized, finally, that sometimes, people reveal their true emotions in the most unexpected ways. Her mother's dance in the rain, her laughter, her boldness, it had all been a way of sharing her heart. Nia understood now that love, memory, and courage could appear in small acts, in ordinary places, and in moments that seemed simple but carried extraordinary meaning.